Hello there, dear viewer. Today I want to talk about movie collecting and how it has changed over the past 10 years. I'm going to be talking a bit about my own personal film collecting journey, but also looking at how the industry has changed, because it has changed quite a bit in the time that I have been collecting. So if we cast our minds back to 2014, this was when I was personally getting started on my own film journey. Of course, as a young boy and a teenager, I would watch films, but I was never really into films. I wasn't passionate about films. I was passionate about Star Wars, but I wasn't interested in film and the medium and the history. This all changed in 2014, thanks to my brother, who's responsible for getting me into all of this. And one of the major things that spurred me on in wanting to discover more films was the Blu-ray format itself. And so I would spend lots of my money buying these. And these are studio Blu-ray titles. You know, the ones that you get in the standard blue case. And this was a really accessible way of me discovering new films, because I could go into my local HMV shop and I could buy 5 of these for £30. And I still wish they had that offer on, but sadly, long gone are the days when you could go into an HMV and browse hundreds of titles and walk away with them for effectively £6 each. It was so good. And I really do miss those days. So that's just one of the things that has changed over the years. But I took the next step in my own personal film collecting journey when I didn't leave behind the studio Blu-rays, but I discovered something else, and it was the boutique Blu-ray. Although I didn't know the term boutique Blu-ray at the time, I don't think it had been coined by anyone, but I remember the very first day I discovered one that looked like this. And this is one of the early Masters of Cinema Eureka titles, which this came out in 2012. And I remember being in the Manchester FOP store and seeing this on the shelf because there was, at the time, a Masters of Cinema promotion. I had no idea what any of that even meant, but I was so enthralled by the clear case, because obviously I only ever really knew the blue case. And what intrigued me even more is that the fact that this film was part of a series, but not a film series. This was some kind of curated collection of films that had been deemed like they belonged together. And this particular title, Repo Man, the film from Alex Cox, I had never even heard of at all. But from reading the back and then seeing that it had a load of special features, I knew that in some way this film had to be important. And I took the gamble. I spent, I think these were £8 on offer at the time. So, God, I wish we could go back to that time. So anyway, I picked this up and the rest was history, because I then wanted to get a lot more of these spy numbers in the Masters of Cinema collection. This was still a number of years before I even started talking in front of a camera and putting my videos on YouTube. And initially when I did that, I was just talking about films that got released theatrically. But then, because I was so passionate about watching films on physical media, and particularly collecting things like the Masters of Cinema collection, I started making a few videos about these things. And I think my first initial video that did very well, and by very well I mean got more than 50 views, was a video on the Criterion collection, which had just come to the UK for the very first time. And at the time this was huge news for me, because at that point I wasn't importing any Blu-rays from any other country, and I had looked from afar at collectors in the United States, and I really wanted to get hold of some of these Criterion collection titles, because in the UK market they weren't available. So I made that video talking about the Criterion collection, and I had no real clue about what I was talking about really, because since that point I've watched thousands of films, and not only have I educated myself a lot on the history of cinema, I've also had a very good time doing it. But talking about the Criterion collection coming to the UK, that was a major point for collectors in this country. Firstly, it heralded a new label coming to the market, which was big news because it meant we would get more films being released. But now looking back, we can also see this time being the start of when film licenses were being spread thinner and thinner. The more of these Blu-ray companies and labels that are in the market, the more competitive it is for them to acquire the licenses that they would want to acquire. And we've seen over the past few years that a number of labels have had to change their strategies a bit and explore different areas of cinema, because quite frankly, the old pool of films that they were drawing from, they were starting to run dry. And not only that, but we've seen even more labels enter the market. We saw Indicator entering, and they were a big thing. We've seen the likes of Radiance come to the market. Existing labels like 88 Films, they have grown and grown. Arrow Video has gotten bigger and bigger over the years. And then the big thing that really changed everything was the advent of 4K UHD as the new format. Because initially, back when I started collecting, there was news about 4K coming to market, but a lot of people were very wary about it, and a lot of people were saying that it was never going to catch on because the discs would be too expensive, and particularly films would have to be restored in 4K to be put on 4K discs to make it worth the while. And many people back then thought that license holders and the big studios would not put in the money to invest in restoring films in 4K. But oh, how time changes everything, because if you look at the market today, you can find some of the most niche and obscure stuff coming to the 4K market. And that's because the whole process has gotten cheaper to do. The adoption rate on the consumer side is much higher. This is because 4K Blu-ray players are cheaper. If you have a PS5 console, you can play 4K discs on that. So a lot more people have the means to play 4K discs, and that is why we find ourselves in this golden age now of the choice that we have both on Blu-ray and 4K. It just is a great time to be a collector in terms of what we can access. As well as the continued rise of the boutique labels over time, we've also seen the bigger studios put less and less of an emphasis on physical media. We aren't getting as many interesting studio releases on just standard Blu-rays like this, particularly in the case of this one, Niagara. This is a 20th Century Fox title, and when Disney acquired Fox, many of these discs went out of print. They weren't reprinted at all since then. And with Disney's approach to streaming being their main business model for films and television, we just aren't getting this kind of stuff released on disc. And to this day, sadly, those Disney and Fox vaults remain pretty much closed. There's the odd exception that might slip out here and there, but there's a whole wealth of films that are just being kept from us in terms of physical media. And then I can't talk about changes in the industry without talking about the fact that prices have increased across the board. And this is not just limited to collecting films on physical media. Things are expensive in general these days. But in order for a lot of film companies and boutique Blu-ray labels to survive, they have to keep the costs quite high, because you have to remember they're not selling through as many units as the big studios would have done back in the day, particularly during the DVD era when DVDs were flying off the shelves. And you'll find that they have to do the limited edition model where they release the big box set with lots of extras and booklets and posters and art cards, etc. Because otherwise those kind of releases would just not be financially viable at all. And sometimes it's even in the contract of the film license itself. The license holders will say to these labels that you have to make a certain level of return for this to even be worth doing. So in many ways, it's more expensive to be a physical media collector than ever before. And I'm absolutely not denying that at all. Like I said, years and years ago, you would get 5 of these titles for £30 in an HMV. And now you can walk in and you can come out with just one film for that price. Whereas if you go back to 2014 and you told me that people would be spending £25, £30 for one film, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy, because I personally would have never done that. I remember when Criterion first came to the UK and they were priced extraordinarily high for what we had become used to. And when they lowered the price to £18 each. This was still more expensive than any other single title films in the industry. Yet here we are, and there are day one limited edition steelbooks for films that are £50 for one film, or £60. So we're living in very pricey times. But I guess the silver lining to this is, in some ways, it makes us be a bit more selective with our buying and maybe rein in some bad habits when it comes to collecting. But it's tough. I do really wish that things were much cheaper, particularly because costs elsewhere in life continue to rise, and it just means we're having less disposable income to spend on the things that we love. So I guess that's just a bit of a look back at how things have changed over the past 10 years for me in terms of collecting, but also looking at the industry and what's changed. And if you like this video, this kind of conversational discussion style, then I can do more of this kind of stuff. I might do a follow-up on where I think things are going to go in the next 10 years, and then maybe we can look back at the time and see how wrong I got it, or maybe how right I was. Also, I'm thinking of just doing more videos discussing collecting habits in general, you know, the good things, the bad things, maybe give tips to people who are newer collectors to maybe not make some of the same mistakes that I've made. So yeah, if you like this kind of thing, just let me know in a comment below, and I can definitely do more. If you'd like to stick around on the channel and get some film recommendations from me, such as Repo Man, which is a great film, then just click the video that's presented on screen right now, and that'll take you to another one. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.